The wind had been screaming since sundown. Not just whistling, not just whispering, but screaming, like it was mourning something or warning someone. Outside the cabin, the snow fell sideways, sharp, relentless. Not the kind that drapes the world in quiet beauty. No, this was the kind that erases things, roads, paths, footprints, lives. But inside, there was a fragile keese. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Tessa's hands were dusted in flour. She was kneading dough for tomorrow's bread, something warm, something real, something to remind her she was still alive. She liked the silence. She had chosen it. Silence, after all, was safer than noise, safer than voices, slurring threats in dark hallways, safer than keys stolen, than doors left unlocked. But then it came, the knock. 3 uneven, urgent thuds. Not loud, but wrong, offbeat. Too solid, too human. Tessa froze. She didn't move, didn't breathe. At first, her mind grasped for logic. A branch, the wind, maybe an animal blown against the door. But then came a second knock, lighter this time, slower, like someone was running out of strength. Her heartbeat quickened. It pounded in her ears, fast and wild. Every muscle tightened. Every nerve screamed, "Don't open it." But something else whispered, "What if someone needs help?" She stepped away from the kitchen counter. The rolling pin clattered to the floor. Step by step, she crossed the creaky floorboards. The cabin held its breath with her. She reached the door. On the other side of the frosted glass, snow whipped across the porch in angry spirals. But through it, through that swirling chaos, she saw it. A shadow, slumped, still, a figure barely upright, sinking slowly into white. Tessa's hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob. And in that moment, in that impossible, terrifying moment, she had no idea that the person on the other side of the door was going to rip open everything she thought she had buried, everything she believed was dead and gone. The door creaked open with a sound that felt too loud for the silence. Snow burst in like a wild animal, swirling across the floor. And then he fell. The man didn't stumble. He collapsed, right into Tessa's arms. His body hit her with full weight, wet, frozen, heavy like dead wood. She staggered back, barely catching him. He wasn't speaking, wasn't even fully conscious. She dragged him inside with strength she didn't know she had. His clothes were stiff with ice layers frozen together. His beard was tangled, crusted with snow. A deep gash above his right eyebrow had frozen into a jagged scar. His skin gray-blue. She laid him by the fire, close but not too close. Pulled off his soaked coat one sleeve at a time. Then his boots split at the seams, socks soaked, skin pale. She covered him in blankets, threw more logs into the fire. The training kicked in, not panic procedure. She'd done this before, in hospitals during late shifts and emergencies, but never here, never alone, and never with someone like this. His lips trembled, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. She poured hot water, added honey. Kneeling beside him, she lifted the cup to his lips. "Drink," she whispered. His fingers twitched. He sipped slowly. Then, "Thank you," he rasped. That voice, rough, faint, but strangely familiar, like something buried deep inside her had stirred, an echo she couldn't place. Then she reached for his wrist. She needed to check his pulse. She rolled up the sleeve and froze. There, just below the crease of his hand, was a birthmark, small, dark, shaped like a maple leaf. Sharp edges, distinct. Her breath caught. She pulled her hand back like she'd touched fire. Her mind refused to understand what her eyes had seen, because that same birthmark, that exact mark, was on her wrist too. And the last time she saw it was when it belonged to the hand that used to tuck her into bed 20 years ago. For a long moment, nothing moved. Tessa was still crouched beside the man, one hand frozen midair, her eyes locked on the mark that mirrored her own. She couldn't breathe. The fire behind her snapped. The wind outside screamed. But everything inside her was still. He stirred, just a twitch at first. Then a low, cracked breath escaped his lips. His eyes fluttered, sluggish, heavy-lidded, but then they opened, and they saw her. Not just looked, recognized. He blinked slowly, studying her face like it was something sacred. Then, barely above a whisper, he said it. Tessa, her name. That single word broke her wide open. Like a dam collapsing. Like a wound ripped clean. The air rushed out of her lungs. She stumbled backward, knocking over the tin cup. Tea spilled across the floor, forgotten. Her hands flew to her mouth. Not to scream, not to cry. Just to hold something in. Something she didn't even know was still inside her. That name, her name spoken in his voice. A voice she'd last heard as a child. A voice she had buried with the memory of a man who never came back. Could it be? No. No. It was impossible. Her father was dead. He had to be. He never called, never wrote, never came for her. And yet, here he was, lying on her floor, wearing her name like it had never left his lips. She fled the room, bolted into the bathroom, locked the door, collapsed onto the cold tile. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. And yet, inside her chest, something cracked. A voice she hadn't heard in decades whispered back, "Daddy?" But the question swallowed itself before it reached her lips. Was this real? Was this a second chance? Or just another trick of a cruel world? Was this man truly her father, or was he just the newest ghost in a long line of nightmares? It was a Sunday like any other. Tessa had woken up early. Her shift at the hospital had been long, and her soul tired. She wasn't the kind to go to church regularly. But that morning, something pulled her there. Maybe it was the weight of silence at home. Maybe it was the ache of being invisible in a world that only remembered people when they screamed. She sat in the back row, alone, quiet. That's when she noticed her, a small elderly woman sitting 2 pews down. She wore a wool coat that looked too thin for the season. Her hands were clasped tightly, knuckles white. But her smile, when she caught Tessa's glance, was soft, like warm bread. "Hi there," the woman whispered. Her voice was gentle, almost fragile. "I'm Nancy." They talked briefly after the service, just small talk, nothing deep. But Nancy's words had weight, like each syllable came from a well of quiet pain. She said her son Derek had been laid off. They were staying with a sick relative who yelled through the night. "No rest for him," she sighed. "Poor boy, he tries so hard." Tessa felt that familiar pull. That old reflex of someone who had once been unwanted to give, to help, to be the safe place she never had. So when Nancy apologized for talking too much, Tessa shook her head. "Why don't you come stay with me?" she said. "Just for a little while, until things get better." Nancy's eyes welled with tears. She gripped Tessa's hands in both of hers. "God bless you," she whispered. By nightfall, Nancy and Derek were moving into her apartment. And Tessa, standing at her door, didn't yet know that she had just invited in the storm. At first, it felt right. Nancy brought crocheted doilies from her suitcase, placing them delicately across tablet tops and shelves like she was giving the apartment a soul. She baked cornbread. She hummed while folding laundry. She told stories of her days as a third-grade teacher in some sleepy little town Tessa had never heard of. Derek was quiet, polite. He helped fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen. He carried up groceries without being asked. For a moment, just a moment, Tessa felt like she was part of something that looked like a family. But the warmth didn't last. It never does, when it's built on borrowed time. Within a week, Derek's smiles faded. His boots started showing up outside her bedroom door. He stayed out late, came home reeking of whiskey, sometimes with strangers, men who laughed too loud and stared too long. One night, Tessa walked out of the bathroom to find Derek standing at her door, just standing there, motionless, staring. "Thought I heard something," he said, grinning, but his eyes weren't smiling, she told Nancy. The next morning, over pancakes, the older woman waved it off. "Men get jumpy when they're under stress," she said lightly. "He means well. Give him grace." Grace. That was the word she used, as if Tessa owed it to him. After that, Tessa started locking her bedroom door. She shouldn't have had to, but she did, and even then, it didn't feel like enough. The apartment, once hers, now felt infected. The air, heavier. The lights, dimmer. The walls, closer. And deep in her gut, Tessa began to realize this wasn't help anymore. This was a takeover. It happened fast. One night, Tessa came home from her hospital shift, exhausted, smelling faintly of antiseptic and floor polish, and there was silence. No laughter, no music, no Derek's usual stomping or the clink of beer bottles. She thought for one fragile second maybe they'd finally left. But the moment she closed the door behind her, he was there. Derek, standing in the hallway, sober, calm, too calm. Wearing a clean shirt, hands empty, eyes hollow. "Tessa," he said, almost gently, "got a minute?" She backed up half a step, but there was nowhere to go. He moved faster than she expected, grabbed her, shoved her against the wall, one hand tight around her throat. The air disappeared. Her toes barely touched the floor. Everything blurred. "You want to kick us out?" His voice wasn't loud, but it burned, cold, flat, terrifying. "After everything we've done for you, you owe us something, don't you?" Those words carved into her like broken glass. She clawed at his wrist, fingers scrambling for purchase, but he was strong. And more than that, he wasn't angry. He was empty. Like he wasn't even there. Then, just as suddenly as he grabbed her, he let go. Tessa dropped to the floor, coughing, choking on breath. Her lungs screamed for air. Derek knelt beside her, smiled, brushed a strand of hair from her face like they were lovers. "You'll stay quiet now," he whispered. "No police, no drama, just keep things running, like before." And then he walked away, as if nothing happened. After that, everything changed. He took her keys, took her bank card, took her voice. Tessa no longer lived in that apartment. She survived in it. She stopped inviting anyone over. She worked longer hours at the hospital just to stay away. She locked her purse, hid her ID, kept her phone on silent. And every night she stared at the ceiling and whispered the same words to herself. "This isn't my life. This isn't my home. I am a prisoner, and no one knows I'm here." She came in on a Tuesday. Room 312. Name, Catherine O'Hara. Age, 74. Diagnosis, minor heart attack. Tessa had seen hundreds of patients, but this one was different. Catherine had silver hair swept into a tight bun and a presence that made the sterile hospital room feel grounded. Her eyes were sharp, calm, not the kind that missed much. The first time Tessa checked her vitals, Catherine looked up and said, "You walk like someone who's always afraid of being watched." Tessa froze. She hadn't even said hello yet. Catherine smiled gently. "Don't worry, I've walked that way too." They didn't talk much at first, just quiet exchanges between chart checks and IV lines. But there was something about the way Catherine looked at her. Not pity, not curiosity, just knowing. It was the kind of look that made you feel seen, even if you didn't want to be. And one afternoon, just as Tessa was fluffing her pillow, Catherine said it, simply, clearly. "I have a cabin in the mountains." Tessa blinked. "My family doesn't use it. It just sits there, empty, waiting." Tessa opened her mouth to protest, but Catherine raised a hand. "I'm not offering charity," she said. "I'm offering shelter. That's different." Tessa couldn't speak, could barely breathe. It wasn't just the words, it was the way they were said. Not like a gift, but like a key handed to someone lost in a locked world. Tessa didn't pack a suitcase. Suitcases meant intention. Suitcases got noticed. And in a house like hers, being noticed was dangerous. So instead, she packed her escape in shadows. Each night after her shift at the hospital, she'd come home, smile like everything was fine, then slip into her room and start choosing, one item at a time. A photo, her nursing license, a pressed maple leaf from her childhood, still tucked between the pages of a book. She wrapped them in old scrubs, tucked them into the bottom of her laundry bag. And the next day, she carried it out like nothing more than dirty clothes. She did it again, and again, and again. No one noticed. They never noticed what mattered. She took nothing large. No furniture, no boxes, no goodbye. Only the pieces of herself she refused to leave behind. Then one night, she didn't come home. She left through the back exit of the hospital, canvas bag in hand, no note, no forwarding address, no drama, just gone. And as Missoula blurred in the rearview mirror of an old Chevy truck, Tessa didn't look back, because looking back meant doubt, and doubt could kill a woman like her. The cabin stood at the edge of the world, a single-story log home with smoke-blackened eaves, shuttered windows, and a roof that creaked under the weight of snow. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. It was quiet. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of people holding back words they'll never say. No, this was the kind of silence that wrapped around you like a wool blanket, heavy, honest, healing. Inside, the air was cold but clean, smelled like cedar ash and something ancient. Tessa stepped through the door, her canvas bag pressed to her chest like a shield. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, from something bigger, the realization that for the first time in years, no one knew where she was. Not Derek, not Nancy, not even her supervisor at the hospital, just her. And the trees, and the wind singing through the chimney like a lullaby. She lit a fire with shaking hands. The stove hissed to life. Flames danced on old brick. She unpacked slowly, a tin of tea, a crocheted scarf, a photo of a little girl sitting on someone's shoulders, face cropped out, but the memory sharp. She boiled snow for water, hung wet clothes by the hearth, scrubbed the tile until it shone like quiet defiance. And that night she curled up on the couch with 2 blankets and no fear. None. No boots outside her door, no strangers in her hallway, no keys missing from her purse, no voice whispering she owed anyone anything, just the wind and firelight. And for the first time in years, she slept, truly, deeply, peacefully slept. He lay on the couch, bundled in 2 blankets, steam rising gently from the tea in his shaking hands. Tessa watched him from across the room, her back against the kitchen counter, heart beating like it wanted answers before her brain could ask the questions. Who was he? He hadn't spoken since she saved his life. Just one word, one name actually. Tessa, like it had lived in his throat for decades, waiting to escape. That should have been impossible. She never told anyone up here her real name. Not even the post office had it. So how? And then his coat sleeve slipped, and she saw it. That scar-shaped birthmark. A maple leaf, just like hers. Same size, same position. Inside the left wrist. It felt like the air had been knocked out of her. She stepped closer, slowly, as if afraid she'd break the moment or herself. "Tessa," he said again, voice rough like gravel. She dropped to her knees. Her lips trembled. "I had a father," she whispered, "but he died in a fire a long time ago." The man blinked slowly. His eyes shimmered. "No," he said gently. "They told me you died. Your mother, she took you and vanished. I searched for years. They said you perished. I believed them." He reached into his coat pocket with shaking hands and pulled out a bear, a tiny wooden bear, rough around the edges, one ear chipped,
and carved into the underside, just barely visible, was the name Buttons. Her stuffed bear, the one her father had promised to make her a wooden version of when she was 7, the one she lost the night the fire took everything. Her knees gave out. She clutched the wooden bear like a lifeline. Her voice cracked through the silence. "Are you really my dad?" And then came the question she didn't want to ask, but couldn't stop. Or is this just another nightmare pretending to be hope? The fire crackled between them. Tessa sat across from him, knees drawn to her chest, eyes locked on the man who used to live in bedtime stories, and then disappeared into ashes. Thomas held the mug with both hands, as if warming his fingers could thaw out decades of silence. And then he began. His voice was gravel, uneven, scraped, like someone trying to speak after swallowing smoke for years. "Your mother, she didn't leave suddenly. She planned it. She told me she'd take you if I didn't give up the case." Tessa frowned. "What case?" He looked up, eyes tired, haunted. "A corruption case. Big, ugly. Judges, cops, city council, everyone had their hands dirty. I was a journalist back then. Not a great one, but relentless." He exhaled, long and broken. "When I got too close, they leaned on her, pressured her. She panicked, thought they'd hurt you if I kept digging, so she ran with you." His hands trembled. He stared into the fire like it owed him a lifetime. "I searched everywhere, Tess, I swear. But 2 years later, there was a fire in Spokane. A child died. They said it was you. I believed them. I stopped everything. I gave up." Tessa couldn't speak. Her throat closed. All she could do was listen. "After that, I disappeared, off the grid, tried to live quietly, drank too much, lost time. Then, last year, someone mailed me something, a box." He paused. "It had everything, proof of what they did, signed confessions, payoffs, names." His voice lowered to a whisper. "And it had a photo of you, grown up, alive." Tessa gasped. Thomas nodded slowly. "They know I have it. They want it back. And if they find me, they'll bury us both." The wind howled louder that night. Thomas moved to the hearth, pulled a muddy satchel from behind a loose panel in the cabin wall. "I buried this beneath a pine tree 6 miles out," he whispered. "Thought it'd be safer there than with me." He set it down on the table with a thud. Tessa stared. It wasn't just a box. It was a coffin of truth, small, cold metal. He opened it. Inside photocopied court documents, land seizure orders with forged signatures, transfer slips showing property handed from poor families to shell corporations, bank transfers, names, judges, mayors, police chiefs, and a sealed envelope labeled Lamar County Phase 2. "They're not just corrupt," Thomas said quietly. "They're coordinated. This goes back decades." Tessa's throat tightened. "How did you even find this?" "A source. He died 3 days after mailing it." Silence. Only the fire dared to speak. Thomas looked at her then, eyes full of weight. "They will come. It's not if, it's when, and they'll kill anyone who stands between them and that box." Tessa looked at the flames, at the box, at her own hands. She had run her whole life, from foster homes, from shame, from Derek, from herself. But now, "You don't have to be part of this," Thomas said. "You owe me nothing." Tessa didn't answer. She just reached forward and closed the box with a click that echoed like a verdict. "If I run again," she whispered, "I lose myself forever." Then she looked up. "Let's finish what you started." There were a dozen names in her phone. She stared at them. Some were old coworkers, others ghosts. But only one had ever looked her in the eyes, truly seen her pain, and offered something no one else did. "If you're ever in danger," he had said, "call me. Doesn't matter when." Victor Lane, retired detective. Once her patient, now her only lifeline. Tessa sat on the floor beside the wood stove, knees pulled tight. One hand clutched the iron box and the other her phone. She dialed. It rang once, twice, and then Lane. His voice was the same, gravelly, measured, sharp like a blade that hadn't dulled. Tessa whispered, barely breathing, "It's me, Tessa Morgan." Pause, then a breath. "You all right?" She swallowed. "No, I need your help. I have something big. Documents, names, bank trails, and a witness." Silence. She could hear her own heartbeat. Then Victor spoke, calm but suddenly wide awake. "Where are you?" Tessa hesitated. "A cabin in Flathead County, north side, off-grid." A beat. "Is he safe?" She knew he meant the witness, her father. "For now." "Stay put. Don't trust anyone else. I'm coming." Click. He was already on his way. The wind howled like wolves.
Victor Lane stepped out of his truck, coat flapping, eyes scanning the tree line like he expected to be followed. The snow crunched under his boots as he approached the cabin. Tessa opened the door, her face pale, jaw clenched. Thomas stood behind her, silent but already ready. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then Victor nodded once and entered. They didn't waste time. Tessa handed over the iron box. Victor placed it on the table without a word. He opened it. Inside, names, photos, signatures, documents stamped with government seals, land transfers, bribes, phone logs, even a ledger of payouts. Victor's eyes narrowed. His hand hovered over one file for longer than the others. When he finally spoke, his voice was like steel. "This is enough to bury an entire district, maybe two." Silence. Thomas looked down. Tessa barely breathed. Then Victor stood up, slammed the lid shut. "I'll take this to people I trust, federal level." He paused. Then he looked directly at Tessa. "But you and your father, you're not safe anymore." A beat. "You need to disappear. Tonight. No goodbyes, no phones, no trails. Understand?" Tessa swallowed hard. Her voice cracked. "For how long?" Victor didn't blink. "Until I call. And that could take weeks or longer." Thomas nodded, eyes hard. Victor placed a burner phone on the table. "Only use this. One number, me." As he turned to leave, the snow picked up, swirling around him like ghosts. He didn't look back. But his words hung in the air like the chill. "Whatever happens next, don't trust anyone." The road out of Flathead was narrow and winding, cut deep through pine trees and snowdrifts. Tessa sat beside her father in the borrowed truck. Neither of them spoke for miles. She watched the trees blur by like ghosts of the past finally letting go. Thomas broke the silence first. "We could go back, press charges, make them pay." His voice wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of being hunted. Tired of seeing his daughter flinch at shadows. Tessa shook her head gently. "I thought about it 1,000 times." She looked out the window. "But that house, those people, they already took too much. I won't let them take my peace, too." Thomas nodded. They didn't need to burn anything down to feel justice. Sometimes not returning is the greatest revenge. Sometimes peace is louder than prison bars. Victor would handle the rest. Nancy and Derek, if the files said what she thought they did, would soon face questions from people with federal badges and no patience. Tessa had spent years thinking survival meant fighting, but now it meant choosing silence, choosing healing, choosing to walk away and never look back. The snow had begun to melt. Each morning, a new sound joined the silence, dripping icicles, chirping birds, the low hum of a handsaw slicing through old pine. Tessa and her father didn't say much at first, but their hands worked together like a language of their own. They patched the roof, replaced the cracked window panes.
Tessa whitewashed the walls with wide, messy strokes, while Thomas sanded down the floorboards with careful hands. One afternoon, they burned the old mattress, the one Tessa used to cry herself to sleep on. She didn't say why. She didn't need to. Instead, they built a new bed frame, together. They fished in the stream behind the cabin. Tessa learned to gut trout while Thomas made jokes about city girls who can now survive in the wild. They baked their first bread, flat and slightly burnt, but they laughed until the cabin echoed with sound. Then, one day at the weekly village fair, Tessa noticed something at a craftsman's stall, a little wooden bear. It was hand-carved, simple, rough, but its eyes were soft, gentle. On its belly, a name burned in cursive, Buttons. Her breath caught. Thomas stepped beside her, smiling. He pointed to a small sign next to the bear, made by the old man of the forest. They didn't say anything, but their hands found each other, and for the first time in years, Tessa smiled without sadness behind it. Some nights were quiet, too quiet. Tessa would wake with a sharp breath, like drowning just before breaking the surface. Her hands shook. Her throat burned from the scream that never came. There were no fists now, no slammed doors. No, Derek. But fear didn't need footsteps to be real. Sometimes healing wasn't loud or glorious. Sometimes it looked like a woman sitting on the floor at 2:13 a.m., hugging her knees, whispering, "I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe." Thomas never knocked. He just appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs of tea, the steam curling like old secrets in the dark. He didn't ask what the nightmare was about. He never said, "It's over," because he knew some battles echo long after the war ends. He simply sat beside her. Sometimes they drank, sometimes they just sat. On the worst nights, he would place her childhood bear Buttons into her lap wordlessly. A reminder that before the pain, there was once softness, and after the pain, there still could be. One night, Tessa whispered without looking up, "Do you think I'll ever stop being afraid?" Thomas stared into the steam of his cup. "No," he said softly, "but you'll stop being alone in it." And that made all the difference. It happened at the town's hardware store. Tessa was standing next to Thomas, debating between 2 kinds of wood stain. The cashier, a woman in her 60s with curious eyes and a slow smile, tilted her head. "Is that your father?" There was no judgment in her voice, just a question. Tessa paused, her heart flickering like a candle in the wind. For a long time, she had lived with her story locked behind her teeth. Being fatherless had become her shield. But this time, she didn't flinch. She looked at Thomas, hands calloused from work, eyes gentle, and a smear of paint still on his flannel sleeve. "Yes," she said, letting the word settle into her chest like warmth after winter. It was just 1 syllable, but it felt like unlocking 1,000 doors. Later that night, they sat on the porch with mugs of cocoa. Tessa rolled up her sleeve, showing a faded scar from the old days. "Do you think it's ugly?" she asked. Thomas shook his head slowly. "I think it's proof," he whispered, "that you kept going even when it hurt." Tears pricked her eyes, not because of the pain, but because someone saw it and didn't look away. Scars don't need to vanish, they just need a witness. And for the first time in 20 years, Tessa let someone stay long enough to see hers. It wasn't glamorous. The clinic was small, tucked between a bakery and a post office, paint peeled from the window frames, and the waiting room had magazines from last year. But it was enough. Tessa filled out the form with steady hands, signing her name without hesitation. Tessa O'Hara. No aliases, no hiding. The nurse manager, a soft-spoken woman named Elise, read through her papers and smiled. "We could really use someone like you here." Her first day was quiet. Blood pressure checks, flu shots, listening more than she spoke. Then a little boy with a cast looked up at her and asked, "Are you Nurse Tessa?" The way he said it, simple, innocent, and warm, made something bloom in her chest. He didn't know her past. He didn't care.
To him, she was Nurse Tessa, not broken, not hiding, just kind, and that was enough. In this town, she wasn't the woman who escaped the nightmare. She was the woman who helped others heal. Not all battles are loud. Sometimes the greatest victory is being called by your name and not flinching. The porch always smelled of cedar and pine. Thomas would sit there every morning with a mug of black coffee, a block of wood, and a knife worn down from years of stories. He no longer carved for money, or even for the market. He carved because his hands needed to move, and because his heart, even after all this time, still had something to say. Owls, bears, a fox once, because Tessa said she saw one out by the lake. But most of all, he carved small wooden bears with wide eyes and round ears. One even had a crooked smile. That one he named Buttons too. "It's for the ones who never got to keep their fathers," he told Tessa one evening, placing a finished bear gently on the windowsill. "Maybe holding something warm helps them forget the cold for a while." At the spring fair, the children would come by, pick up a bear, and ask, "Did you really make this, sir?" And Thomas would nod with a soft chuckle. Not every child knew his story, but somehow they all felt it. He wasn't just carving wood, he was carving apologies he never got to say, memories he wished he could rewrite, hope for little hands that still trembled at night. And in every groove of wood, every grain shaped by old fingers, Thomas was learning one truth. You can't undo the past, but you can shape the present, softly, gently, like wood under a healing hand. Some evenings, when the fire was low and the snow tapped soft rhythms against the cabin windows, he would say it, not loudly, not as a command, but almost like a prayer. Tessa, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real. That the name he had whispered into so many empty nights had finally answered back. And each time he said it, her chest warmed, not from the fire, but from being seen, from being someone again. There were no parades, no news stories, no dramatic confrontations, but there was healing. There was sourdough rising in the kitchen. There were bear carvings lined up like soldiers along the windowsill. There were nights of silence, not empty, but peaceful. There was life. And every time Thomas said her name, Tessa smiled, because for the first time in forever, she didn't just survive. She lived. Sometimes survival is silent. There aren't medals for the nights you cry alone, no headlines for the courage it takes to walk away quietly and rebuild your soul from ashes. But healing doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be yours. Tessa's story reminds us that kindness isn't weakness. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. And you don't need to be unbroken to be whole again. So if you're out there feeling lost, overlooked, or like your story doesn't matter, just remember, sometimes the people who disappear come back stronger. And sometimes the name you thought no one remembered becomes the word that saves you. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, don't leave quietly. Subscribe to Pieces of Soul for more true emotional stories that remind us we're never truly alone. Drop a comment and tell us, what name would you want to be called if someone were finally calling you home? And don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss the moment a soul comes back to life.